Elena had been working at the Hartwell Country Club for almost 3 years now. Every evening, she would put on her plain gray uniform, tie her hair back in a simple bun, and spend the next 8 hours cleaning floors, wiping tables, and making sure everything looked perfect for people who never even looked at her face. She was 42 years old. She had 2 children waiting for her at home. Her daughter was 15, and her son had just turned 11. They lived in a small apartment on the other side of the city, the kind of place where the walls were thin and you could hear your neighbors arguing at night. It was not much, but it was home. The country club was a different world. The floors were made of marble. The chandeliers cost more than Elena would earn in 10 years. The women who came here wore dresses that sparkled under the lights, and the men smelled like expensive cologne. They talked about vacations in places Elena had only seen in magazines. They complained about problems that were not really problems at all. Dot and Elena, she was invisible to them. She moved through the rooms like a ghost, picking up their empty glasses, cleaning up their messes, and disappearing before anyone could notice she was there. She never complained. She needed this job. Her mother was sick, and the medical bills kept piling up. Her husband had left them years ago, and she had been carrying the weight of her family on her shoulders ever since. So she kept her head down, did her work, and went home tired every single night. But there was one thing at the country club that always made her stop. Even if just for a moment. The piano. It sat in the corner of the grand ballroom. A beautiful black Steinway, with keys that looked like they had never been touched by anyone who truly understood them. Sometimes, when the room was empty, Elena would walk past it slowly. She would let her eyes rest on those keys, and something deep inside her chest would ache. She never touched it. She knew better than that. A woman like her had no business going near something so expensive. But she could not help the way her fingers would twitch at her sides, almost like they remembered something her mind had tried to forget. Tonight was different. Tonight was the biggest event of the year, the annual charity gala. The richest families in the city had gathered in the ballroom, dressed in their finest clothes, drinking champagne that cost more than Elena's monthly rent. There was music playing from the speakers, soft and elegant, the kind of music that made people feel important. Elena was busy clearing plates for one of the side tables when she made her mistake. She paused near the piano, just for a second, just to look at it one more time. She did not realize anyone was watching, but someone was. Her name was Victoria Hartwell. She was the wife of the man who owned this club, and she was the kind of woman who enjoyed making others feel small. She had perfectly styled blonde hair, a diamond necklace that probably cost more than a house, and a smile that never quite reached her eyes. Victoria was standing with a group of her friends, all of them holding glasses of wine and laughing at something that was probably not even funny. But then she noticed Elena standing near the piano, and her eyes lit up with something cruel. She whispered something to her friends, and they all turned to look. Then Victoria raised her voice, loud enough for half the room to hear. "Excuse me, you there?" The cleaning woman. Elena froze. Her heart dropped into her stomach. She turned slowly, hoping that maybe Victoria was talking to someone else. But no. Those cold eyes were looking directly at her. "Yes, you," Victoria said, waving her hand like she was calling a dog. "Come here." Elena walked over, her legs feeling like they were made of stone. She kept her eyes down, the way she always did when the guests spoke to her. "I saw you looking at the piano," Victoria said. There was amusement in her voice, like she had just found a new toy to play with. "Do you like it?" Elena did not know what to say. She nodded slightly, hoping this conversation would end quickly. But Victoria was not finished. "Tell me," she said, tilting her head to the side, "do you know how to play?" The question hung in the air. Elena felt the eyes of everyone nearby turning toward her. She could hear whispers. She could see the smirks on the faces of Victoria's friends. A little, Elena said quietly. It was the truth, but it was also a lie. She knew more than a little. She knew so much more. But how could she explain that to these people? Victoria's smile grew wider. A little? How wonderful. Then you must play something for us. Elena's blood ran cold. I cannot. I have to work. Nonsense, Victoria said, waving her hand again. I am giving you permission. In fact, I insist. Everyone here would love to hear you play. Would you not? She turned to the crowd around her, and they all nodded and laughed. Some of them pulled out their phones, ready to record whatever was about to happen. Elena understood then. This was not an invitation. This was entertainment. They wanted to watch her embarrass herself. Please, Elena said, her voice barely above a whisper. I do not want to. But Victoria stepped closer, and her voice dropped low enough that only Elena could hear. Listen to me carefully. My husband pays your salary. If you walk away from me right now, I will make sure you never work in this city again. Do you understand? Elena felt her hands begin to shake. She thought about her children at home, waiting for her to come back. She thought about her mother in the hospital, counting on her to pay the bills. She thought about all the years she had spent surviving, fighting, keeping her family together with nothing but her own 2 hands. She could not afford to lose this job. Not tonight. Not ever. So she nodded. Victoria smiled and stepped back. Wonderful. Everyone, make some room. Our cleaning lady is going to give us a little concert. The crowd parted. Someone even pulled out a chair from the piano bench, like they were setting up a stage for a circus act. Elena walked toward the piano, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. She sat down on the bench. The leather was cold beneath her. The keys stretched out in front of her, black and white, waiting. The room had gone quiet. Everyone was watching. Phones were pointed at her. She could see Victoria standing at the front of the crowd, her arms crossed, that cruel smile still on her face. This was supposed to be her humiliation. This was supposed to be the moment when the poor cleaning lady made a fool of herself. In front of the city's elite, Elena placed her fingers on the keys, and she closed her eyes. For a moment. She was not in that ballroom anymore. She was somewhere else. Somewhere far away. Somewhere safe. She could hear her grandmother's voice in her memory, soft and warm, teaching her the first notes she had ever learned. Music is not about showing off, her grandmother used to say. It is about telling the truth. Your truth. The one that lives inside your heart. Elena took a deep breath, and then she began to play. The first note came out soft, almost too soft. It hung in the air like a question, and Elena could feel the weight of every single pair of eyes in that room pressing down on her shoulders. Someone in the crowd giggled. She heard whispers. She knew what they were thinking. They were waiting for her to stumble. They were waiting for her to hit the wrong key, to freeze up, to prove that she was exactly what they thought she was. Just a cleaning lady, pretending to be something more. Her fingers trembled on the keys. For a moment, she almost stopped. She almost got up from that bench and walked away, back to her mop and her bucket, back to being invisible. It would have been easier. It would have been safer. But then she thought about her grandmother. Her grandmother's name was Elena. She had been born in a small village in Eastern Europe, in a country that no longer existed on the maps. She had grown up poor, the daughter of farmers who worked the land with their bare hands. But even as a child, Elena had a gift. She could hear music in everything. In the wind, in the rain, in the way the birds sang at dawn. When she was 7 years old, the village church got a piano. It was old and out of tune, donated by some wealthy family from the city who no longer wanted it. But to Alina, it was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. She taught herself to play. She would sneak into the church every day after her chores and sit at that piano for hours, figuring out the notes one by one. By the time she was 12, she could play pieces that grown musicians struggled with. By the time she was 18, she had earned a scholarship to study at a conservatory in the capital city. For a few years, Alina lived her dream. She performed in concert halls. She played for audiences who gave her standing ovations. People called her a rising star. They said she had the kind of talent that came along once in a generation, and then the war came. Everything was destroyed. The concert halls, the conservatory, the life she had built. Alina lost her home, her career, and most of her family. She escaped to another country with nothing but the clothes on her back and the music still living inside her heart. She never performed again. She could not. The stages were gone. The audiences were gone. The world she had known was gone. She worked in factories. She cleaned houses. She did whatever she had to do to survive. But she never stopped playing Dot in the tiny apartment where she raised her daughter. There was no piano. She could not afford one. So she drew the keys on a piece of cardboard and practiced on that. Her fingers would move across the paper, playing songs that only she could hear. When Elena was born, Elena saw something in her granddaughter, the same gift, the same hunger. She started teaching Elena when she was just 4 years old, using that same piece of cardboard with the painted keys. "Close your eyes," Elena would say. "Do not look at your fingers. Feel the music. Let it move through you." Elena learned fast. By the time she was 6, she could play simple pieces from memory. By the time she was 8, she was playing Chopin and Beethoven. And when Elena turned 10, something wonderful happened. A neighbor down the hall passed away. He was an old man who had lived alone, and he had no family to claim his belongings. Among his things was a piano. It was old and scratched and missing a few keys, but it worked. The building manager was going to throw it away, but Elena begged him to let her have it. He agreed, and for the first time in decades, Elena had a real piano again. That piano changed everything. Elena and her grandmother would sit together for hours every day, playing duets, learning new pieces, losing themselves in the music. Those were the happiest years of Elena's life. She did not have fancy clothes or expensive toys. She did not go on vacations or eat at nice restaurants. But she had her grandmother, and she had the music, and that was enough. Elena passed away when Elena was 17. It happened suddenly on a cold winter night. One moment she was there, sitting at the piano, playing a lullaby she used to sing to Elena as a baby. The next moment she was gone. Elena never touched a piano again after that. She could not. Every time she tried, she would see her grandmother's face, and the pain would be too much to bear. So she locked that part of herself away. She buried it deep inside, where no one could find it. She got a job, got married, had children, and tried to build a life that made sense without the music. But the music never really left her. It was always there, hiding in the shadows, waiting. And now, sitting at this grand piano in front of 100 strangers who wanted to laugh at her, Elena felt it rising up again. She felt her grandmother's presence beside her, warm and steady, like a hand resting on her shoulder. "Play," Elena's voice whispered in her memory. "Tell them your truth." Elena's fingers found their place on the keys. She took a slow breath, and then she began. The opening notes of Chopin's Ballade No. 1 filled the room. It was a piece her grandmother had taught her when she was 15. One of the most difficult and beautiful compositions ever written for piano. It started soft, almost like a question, like someone waking up from a long dream. Dot at first. The crowd did not react. They were still waiting for her to fail. Some of them had their phones out, ready to capture the moment when she would hit a wrong note and prove them right. But the wrong note never came. Instead, the music grew. It swelled like a wave building in the ocean. Elena's fingers moved across the keys with a grace that seemed impossible for someone in a cleaning uniform. Each note was perfect. Each phrase was filled with emotion. This was not someone who knew a little about piano. This was someone who had spent a lifetime with this instrument, who understood it the way you understand an old friend. The whispers stopped. The giggles faded. One by one, the phones lowered. Victoria, who had been standing at the front of the crowd with that cruel smile on her face, felt the smile slowly disappear. Her eyes widened. Her lips parted slightly. She did not understand what she was seeing. This was not possible. This cleaning woman, this nobody, was playing better than anyone Victoria had ever heard. Better than the professional musicians they hired for these events. Better than the performers at the symphony downtown. The music filled every corner of the ballroom. It bounced off the marble floors and the crystal chandeliers. It wrapped around every person in the room and held them still. Elena did not see any of this. Her eyes were still closed. She was not in the ballroom anymore. She was back in that tiny apartment with her grandmother, sitting side by side on the bench of that old broken piano, playing together one last time. Tears began to roll down her cheeks. She did not wipe them away. She let them fall, because they were part of the music now. They were part of the truth she was telling. The piece moved into its middle section, dark and stormy, full of passion and pain. Elena's hands flew across the keys. The room seemed to hold its breath, and somewhere in the back, near the doorway, a man in a dark suit stood watching with his mouth open. He had come to this event as a guest, a music critic for the biggest newspaper in the city. He had heard thousands of pianists in his career. He had reviewed concerts at the finest halls in the world, but he had never heard anything like this. The music poured out of Elena like water from a broken dam. It had been locked inside her for 25 years, and now it was finally free. Every note carried a piece of her story. Every chord held a memory she had tried so hard to forget. Her fingers danced across the keys without hesitation. She did not need to think about what came next. Her hands remembered everything. The countless hours of practice. The lessons with her grandmother. The way each phrase was supposed to breathe and bend and break. The ballad moved through its journey, and Elena moved with it. The soft opening had given way to something darker now, something fierce. The music crashed and rolled like thunder. Her hands stretched across the keys, reaching for notes that seemed impossible to play. But she found them. Every single one. In the crowd, people had stopped pretending to be polite. They had stopped whispering to each other. They had stopped looking at their phones. They just stood there, frozen, watching this woman in a gray cleaning uniform create something beautiful beyond words. A woman near the front felt tears running down her face. She did not know why she was crying. She had come to this gala to drink champagne and gossip with her friends. She had laughed when Victoria called the cleaning lady to the piano. She had expected a joke, a moment of cheap entertainment. But this was not a joke. This was something real. This was someone pouring their entire soul into the music, and it was hitting her in a place she had forgotten existed. She was not the only one. All around the room, people were feeling things they could not explain. A businessman who had not cried since his father's funeral felt his eyes growing wet. A young woman who spent her days chasing money and status suddenly felt empty inside, like she had been missing something important her whole life. The music did that. It reached into people and found the things they had buried, the regrets, the losses, the dreams they had given up on. It pulled everything to the surface and made them feel it all over again. Victoria stood at the edge of the crowd, and she was feeling it too. But for her, it was different. She was not sad. She was not moved. She was terrified. She had made a terrible mistake. She had tried to humiliate this woman, to turn her into a laughingstock, and instead she had unleashed something extraordinary. Now everyone was looking at Elena with wonder and respect, and Victoria knew that when this was over, they would look at her very differently. She wanted to run. She wanted to disappear before anyone could see the shame on her face. But she could not move. The music held her in place, just like it held everyone else. Elena played on. The middle section of the ballade was the hardest part. It was fast and complicated, with notes flying in every direction like leaves in a storm. Most pianists struggled with this section. Even professionals sometimes stumbled through it, hoping the audience would not notice their mistakes. But Elena did not stumble. Her fingers were a blur, moving with a speed and precision that seemed almost superhuman. She hit every note exactly where it needed to be. The music swirled around the room, wild and untamed, and then suddenly it pulled back. The storm faded. The chaos quieted, and something gentle emerged from the keys. This was the heart of the piece. A simple, tender melody that floated above a soft accompaniment. It was the kind of music that made you think of things you had lost. Things you wished you could hold one more time, Dot. Elena thought of her grandmother's hands. Those old, wrinkled hands that had worked so hard her whole life, but could still create such beauty on the piano. She thought of the way her grandmother would smile when Elena finally mastered a difficult passage. She thought of their last night together, when Elena had played that lullaby and then closed her eyes forever. The tears kept falling down Elena's face, but she did not stop playing. She could not stop. Not now. Not when she was so close to the end. The music critic near the back of the room had pulled out a small notebook. His hands were shaking as he tried to write. In 30 years of reviewing concerts, he had never felt like this. He had heard the greatest pianists in the world perform this exact piece in the finest concert halls, with the best instruments money could buy. None of them had played it like this. This woman was not just playing the notes. She was living them. Every phrase came from somewhere deep inside her, from a place of real pain and real love. This was not a performance. This was a confession. This was truth. He looked around the room at the crowd of wealthy strangers, all of them standing in stunned silence. He saw the tears on their faces. He saw the way they clutched their hands to their chests. He knew he was witnessing something that would never happen again. The ballade began its final climb. The gentle melody gave way to something bigger, something triumphant. The music swelled and grew, building toward its conclusion. Elena's whole body moved with the instrument now. She was not sitting still anymore. She was swaying, leaning into the keys, giving everything she had left. This was for her grandmother. This was for all the years of silence. This was for every time someone had looked past her like she did not exist. This was for every night she had worked until her back ached and her feet bled, just to keep her family alive. This was her voice. And finally, after all this time, someone was listening. The final passages came crashing through the room like waves against rocks. The sound was enormous, filling every corner, shaking the chandeliers above. And then, with one last thundering chord, it was over. Elena's hands lifted from the keys. She opened her eyes. The silence that followed was the loudest thing she had ever heard. For a moment, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The room was completely still, like time itself had stopped to honor what had just happened. Then someone started clapping. Dot. It was the music critic. He was standing near the back, his notebook forgotten in his pocket, his hands coming together over and over again. The sound echoed through the silence like a single drop of rain before a storm, and another person joined. Then another. Then 10 more. Then 50. Suddenly the whole room was applauding. Not polite, gentle applause like you hear at fancy events. This was real. This was loud. This was people pounding their hands together because they did not know any other way to express what they were feeling. Someone shouted. Someone else let out a sob. And then, one by one, people started standing up. Those who had been sitting rose from their chairs. Those who had been leaning against the walls stepped forward. A standing ovation. For a cleaning lady. In a room full of millionaires, Elena sat at the piano bench, her hands trembling in her lap, tears still wet on her cheeks. She did not understand what was happening. She looked out at the crowd, at all these people who had wanted to laugh at her just minutes ago, and she saw something she had not expected. She saw respect. She saw admiration. She saw people looking at her like she was someone worth seeing. And through the crowd, pushing her way forward with a pale face and shaking hands, came Victoria, the woman who had started all of this, the woman who had wanted to destroy her. Their eyes met across the room, and for the first time in her life, Victoria did not know what to say. The applause would not stop. It kept rolling through the room like waves that refused to calm down. People were shouting things at Elena. Beautiful, incredible, amazing. Words she had never heard directed at her before. Words she did not know how to receive. She stood up slowly from the piano bench. Her legs felt weak, like they might give out at any moment. Her whole body was shaking. She was not sure if it was from exhaustion or emotion or fear or all of it mixed together. Victoria pushed through the crowd until she was standing just a few feet away from Elena. The two women faced each other. The noise around them seemed to fade into the background, like the rest of the world had disappeared, and only they remained. Victoria's face was a mess of emotions. Her perfectly applied makeup could not hide the confusion in her eyes. Her lips moved, but at first no sound came out. She looked like someone who had just watched the ground open up beneath her feet. How did you... She started, but she could not finish the sentence. Elena looked at her. Just looked at her. She did not feel angry. She did not feel satisfied. She just felt tired. Tired of being invisible. Tired of being looked down on. Tired of having to prove that she was human. You wanted to embarrass me, Elena said. Her voice was quiet but steady. You wanted everyone to laugh at the cleaning lady who thought she could play piano. Victoria opened her mouth to deny it, but she could not. The truth was too obvious. Everyone in that room had seen what she did. Everyone knew exactly what her intentions had been. I did not know, Victoria finally said. I did not know you could play like that. You thought I was nobody, Elena finished for her. You thought because I clean your floors and wash your dishes, I have nothing else inside me. You thought my uniform was all I was. Victoria's face went red. She was not used to being spoken to like this. She was not used to being wrong. She was not used to standing in a room full of people who were looking at her with judgment instead of admiration. I am sorry, she whispered. The words came out small and broken, like they cost her something to say. Elena studied her face for a long moment. She could see that the apology was real. Victoria was truly sorry, not because she had been cruel, but because she had been caught. Because her cruelty had backfired. Because now she was the one who looked foolish. But Elena did not say any of that. She just nodded slowly. I hope you remember this night, Elena said. I hope you remember that the person serving your drinks or cleaning your house might be carrying a whole world inside them that you know nothing about. Before Victoria could respond, someone else pushed through the crowd. It was the music critic, a man in the dark suit who had been watching from the back. He was older, maybe in his 60s, with gray hair and kind eyes behind silver glasses. Excuse me, he said, slightly out of breath. I am so sorry to interrupt, but I have to speak with you. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card. His hands were still trembling as he held it out to Elena. My name is Bernard. I write for the National Arts Review. I have been covering classical music for over 30 years. He paused, like he was trying to find the right words. What you just did. I have never experienced anything like it. That was not just playing. That was something else entirely. Elena took the card, but did not look at it. She was still trying to process everything that was happening. Where did you study? Bernard asked. Who was your teacher? You must have trained at one of the great conservatories. Elena almost laughed. Almost. I never went to any school, she said. My grandmother taught me. In our apartment. On an old piano that was missing 3 keys. Bernard's eyes went wide. That is impossible. The technique, the interpretation, the emotional depth. You cannot learn that without formal training. My grandmother was a concert pianist, Elena said. Before the war took everything from her. She gave me everything she knew. Every piece. Every secret. Every lesson she learned in all her years of performing. Bernard shook his head in disbelief. Your grandmother must have been extraordinary. She was, Elena said, and her voice cracked slightly on the words. She was the most extraordinary person I have ever known. By now, other people were gathering around. The same people who had smirked at her when she walked to the piano. The same people who had pulled out their phones, expecting to record her failure. They were looking at her differently now. Some of them had tears in their eyes. Some of them looked ashamed. A woman in a red dress stepped forward. She was one of Victoria's friends, one of the ones who had laughed the loudest when Elena was called to play. I am so sorry, she said. The way we treated you. It was wrong. I do not know what to say. Another person came forward. Then another. Apologies started flowing from everywhere. I did not know. I am so sorry. That was incredible. You are amazing. Elena stood there, surrounded by people who finally saw her, and she did not know what to feel. Part of her wanted to accept their apologies and move on. Part of her wanted to scream at them, to ask them why it took a piano performance to make them see her as a human being. But she did neither. She just stood there, holding the music critic's business card, feeling the weight of the moment pressing down on her shoulders. Bernard was still talking, his words coming fast and excited. You have to perform again. I can arrange something. A small concert at first, maybe at one of the local venues. Once people hear you play, once word gets out. I have not played in 25 years, Elena interrupted. Tonight was. I do not even know what tonight was. I cannot just become a concert pianist. I have children. I have bills. I have a life. I understand, Bernard said. But please, just think about it. A gift like yours. It would be a crime to keep it hidden. The world needs to hear what I heard tonight. Elena looked down at the card in her hand. National Arts Review. Bernard's name and phone number printed in elegant letters. It felt strange to hold something like this. Strange and terrifying and exciting all at once. Across the room, she noticed something that made her heart stop. Someone was live streaming. One of the guests had their phone pointed right at her, and the screen showed thousands of viewers watching in real time. The video had been running for the entire performance. Comments were scrolling past faster than anyone could read. She caught glimpses of the words. Who is she? This is incredible. I am crying. Share this everywhere. The video was already spreading. While she stood there in her gray uniform, surrounded by wealthy strangers who had just discovered she was more than they assumed. The rest of the world was finding out too. Elena did not know it yet, but her life was about to change forever. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. Then again. Then again. She had turned it to silent before her shift, but she could feel the vibrations coming one after another without stopping. She pulled it out and looked at the screen. Messages from numbers she did not recognize. Notifications from social media apps she barely used. Something was happening. Something big. The video of her performance was going viral. And by morning, nothing would ever be the same. Elena did not sleep that night. She went home after her shift, still wearing her gray uniform, still feeling like she was living inside a dream. Her children were already asleep when she got there, and her small apartment was quiet except for the constant buzzing of her phone. She sat down at the kitchen table and watched the numbers climb. The video had 10,000 views when she first checked. An hour later, it had 50,000. By the time the sun came up, it had crossed 1 million. The comments kept coming. People from all over the world were watching her play. They were sharing the video with their friends, their families, their coworkers. They were writing things like, "This made me cry, and I have watched this 20 times, and who is this woman?" News stations started calling. First the local ones, then the national ones. Her phone rang so many times that she had to turn it off, just to think straight. Her inbox filled up with messages from reporters, producers, and people she had never met who just wanted to tell her how much her performance had meant to them. Her daughter woke up that morning and found Elena still sitting at the kitchen table, staring at her phone with wide eyes. "Mom, what is wrong? Did something happen?" Elena looked up at her daughter, this beautiful girl who had grown up watching her mother work double shifts and come home exhausted every night. This girl who had never complained, who had helped take care of her younger brother, who had learned to be strong because she had no other choice. "Something happened," Elena said. "I played the piano last night." Her daughter's face changed. She knew what the piano meant to her mother. She knew about the grandmother she had never met. She knew that her mother had not touched those keys in over 2 decades. "You played? At the country club?" Elena nodded and handed her the phone. Her daughter watched the video in silence. When it ended, there were tears running down her face. "Mom," she whispered, "that was you. That was really you." "That was me," Elena said. "And now I do not know what happens next." What happened next was beyond anything Elena could have imagined. Bernard, the music critic, wrote an article about her performance. It was published the following week in the National Arts Review, and it spread across the internet like wildfire. He called her the most emotionally powerful pianist I have encountered in 3 decades of covering classical music. He wrote about how she had learned from her grandmother, how she had not played in 25 years, how she worked as a cleaning lady at the very club where she gave the performance of a lifetime. The story captured people's hearts. It was not just about music. It was about dignity. It was about all the invisible people in the world who carry extraordinary gifts that nobody ever sees. It was about the cruelty of judging someone by their job or their clothes or their bank account. Offers started pouring in. Concert halls wanted her to perform. Record labels wanted to sign her. Television shows wanted to interview her. Elena was overwhelmed. She had spent so many years just trying to survive, and now suddenly the whole world wanted a piece of her, but she did not rush into anything. She took her time. She thought carefully about what she wanted and what mattered most to her. The first thing she did was pay off her mother's medical bills. Every single one. She made sure her mother had the best doctors, the best treatment, the best care. When her mother asked where the money came from, Elena just smiled and said, "I finally played the piano again." The second thing she did was move her family into a better apartment. Not a mansion, not a penthouse, just a nice, comfortable place with enough room for everyone. A place where the walls were not thin and the heat worked properly. and her children could each have their own bedroom. The third thing she did was start a foundation. She named it after her grandmother, the Alina Foundation for Music Education. Its mission was simple: to provide free piano lessons to children from low-income families. Children who had the gift but not the opportunity. Children like Elena had once been. She hired teachers. She bought instruments. She rented practice spaces in neighborhoods where there were no concert halls, only corner stores and laundromats. And she taught some of the lessons herself, sitting beside children who reminded her of her younger self, watching their eyes light up when they played their first real song. 3 months after the night at the country club, Elena gave her first official concert. It was at a small theater downtown. Nothing fancy, just a stage and a piano and 300 seats. Every ticket sold out in less than an hour. She wore a simple black dress. No diamonds. No designer labels. Just Elena, walking out onto the stage like she had done this 1,000 times before. When she sat down at the piano, she thought about her grandmother. She thought about that tiny apartment and the cardboard keyboard. She thought about the old broken piano they had shared for those precious few years. She thought about everything that had led her to this moment. Then she played. The audience was silent throughout the entire performance. When she finished, they rose to their feet and applauded for so long that Elena had to wipe away tears 3 separate times before they would stop. After the concert, a woman approached her backstage. It took Elena a moment to recognize her dot. It was Victoria. She looked different. Smaller somehow. Less polished. Her eyes were red, like she had been crying. "I was in the audience," Victoria said quietly. "I bought a ticket. I wanted to hear you play again." Elena waited. She did not know what to expect. "I have not stopped thinking about that night," Victoria continued. "About what I did to you. About who I was in that moment." She paused and took a shaky breath. "I have spent my whole life looking down on people, thinking I was better than them because of my money, my husband, my status. But I was wrong. I was so wrong." She reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope. "This is a donation. For your foundation. I know it does not fix anything. I know I cannot undo what I did. But I want to help. I want to be part of something good for once in my life." Elena took the envelope. She did not open it. She just looked at Victoria for a long moment, seeing not the cruel woman who had tried to humiliate her, but a broken person who was finally trying to change. "Thank you," Elena said. "I hope you find what you are looking for." Victoria nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks, and then she turned and walked away. Elena continued to perform. She made recordings. She traveled to different cities. She played in concert halls that her grandmother had only dreamed of. But she never forgot where she came from. She never stopped teaching. She never stopped giving back. And every time she sat down at a piano, every single time, she would close her eyes and feel her grandmother beside her. That warm presence. That gentle voice. "Tell them your truth," Elena would whisper. "The one that lives inside your heart." Elena would smile. And then she would play, years later. When people asked her about that night at the country club, she always said the same thing. They wanted to laugh at me. They wanted to prove I was nothing. But instead, they heard my grandmother's soul. And that changed everything. She would pause then, her eyes distant, remembering. Never underestimate the person cleaning your floors. You have no idea what worlds they carry inside them.